recently completed my private pilot Checkride. I thought I would take a few minutes to record this video to share my experience with you. I know the months leading up to my Checkride, I spent a lot of time on YouTube watching other people who talked about their experiences, and I know that helped me quite a bit to have an idea of what to expect and how to prepare. So I thought I would do the same thing to see if I could help anyone else out with this. I did my Checkride from Omaha, Nebraska. So when the DPE arrived on the day of the Checkride, we went to a back room at the flight school, and we pulled up my application on the IACRA website. He verified all my information with my driver's license and looked at my student certificate, verified my logbook entries to make sure that I had the experience required. He looked at my knowledge test report. I had provided also a list of the decoded questions that I missed from the knowledge test and that knowledge test report. I also included tabs in my logbook so that he could see the 61-109 requirements for aeronautical experience, see the flights that corresponded to those. I also included a list of the proficiency training, that's the 61-107 items, and the dates that those were logged in my logbook. After verifying my information and that I was qualified for the test, we moved forward on reviewing the airplane's documents. Since the airworthiness certificate and registration are kept in the airplane, I had taken photos of those with my phone and printed those off. We had the airplane's logbooks out, including the engine logbook as well as the airframe logbook. I had typed out the list of required inspections, the date that they were last performed, as well as the engine hours if applicable, and then a column showing the next due date or engine hours. And that he seemed to appreciate that. It made it a little bit easier for him to see. He did want me to show in the logbooks for the engine and airframe where those corresponding entries were. The DPE did ask me about service bulletins as well as airworthiness directives. After reviewing all the preliminary paperwork for myself as well as the airplane, we officially began the oral portion of the test. The DPE asked to review my mapped course for our cross country. For this cross country, the DPE asked me ahead of time to plan a flight from Omaha to the first fuel stop required on the way to Detroit. So based on the airplane's performance and fuel consumption information, I decided to make the first fuel stop at Clinton, Iowa. So I pulled out the sectional with my mapped course, the waypoints marked on the sectional, as well as the completed navigation log. I had a detailed sheet with handwritten arithmetic related to fuel burn, takeoff, climb performance, cruise performance, landing performance. He seemed to appreciate that I had all the arithmetic and interpolations shown on that sheet, and then I had the final numbers circled. In addition to the paper sectional, I had the mapped course on ForeFlight on my iPad. I also had printed out the flight plan from the AOPA's iFlight Planner website. That provides a lot of extra information. That was helpful because it included METAR and TAF data for departure and arrival airports, as well as winds aloft for en route. I had called 800 WX Brief earlier in the morning and received a standard weather briefing. I typed up and transcribed that phone call and printed that document to refer to. So I basically had 3 different weather sources at my fingertips: live ForeFlight data, the printed AOPA details, as well as my transcription of my WX briefing. That was helpful when the examiner asked about different appropriate aviation weather sources. For this route, I needed to have 2 sectionals. I needed to have the Omaha sectional as well as the Chicago sectional. So what I did is I taped those 2 pieces of paper to make one giant map. The examiner asked, hypothetically, if we were near Iowa City and then we decided that we needed to divert to Dubuque because there may be deteriorating conditions in Clinton, how I would determine a course. I think what he was really getting at was he wanted to see how I would deal with an airport that is on the opposite side of the sectional chart Dubuque is not on the same side of the sectional as the rest of my course. I was able to show him how I could take a piece of paper, line it up with a line of longitude. I located a couple of small airports that are very close to the edge of the sectional that are on both sides, and then use a pencil to trace over and draw circles over those two airports. I drew a circle over the Dubuque airport and then flipped the sectional back over to the primary side and then aligned the piece of paper with the longitude and the two small airports that I had circled. Then I was able to use my plotter to draw a line from our checkpoint that's near Iowa City to Dubuque and determined the appropriate course. On the day of my check ride, there was a lot of thunderstorms to our east. They were pretty much over Des Moines and basically the whole state of Iowa from Minnesota down to Missouri. He wanted to know kind of some things about thunderstorms during this while we were looking at things on ForeFlight at this point. He wanted to know about my aeronautical decision making, and I explained why I would not proceed with this flight today because the storms were just too big. They were too lengthy. It wasn't really feasible to go around them. It would just take us too far off course. He asked me about the 3 stages of development. He asked me about convective sigmets, airmets. Where do I find those? What do they mean? And basically just wanted to know a little bit about how I make a go or no-go decision. We talked a bit more about weather. One of the questions that I missed on my knowledge test was about fog. So I knew that he would bring that up. I tabbed the page about fog in the PHAC, and so that ended up being helpful. I was able to start kind of rambling about fog as I grabbed the PHAC and referred to it, and that seemed to be okay with him. The examiner asked about private pilot limitations. I explained how I wouldn't be able to be compensated for flying other than a pro rata shared cost for fuel, plane rental, as well as the required takeoffs and landings within 90 days in order to carry passengers. I also explained the I'm safe and PAVE checklists. He also asked me where responsibility lies for ensuring an airplane is airworthy. And I explained ultimately it's up to the pilot. It's the owner's responsibility to actually do any work, but before a flight it's the pilot's responsibility to determine and ensure that the plane is airworthy. He asked for my definition of the difference between currency and proficiency, and this is something that I had seen someone else on YouTube talk about, and so I knew that that might be a question. So just have that kind of thought through and be prepared to answer that question. One of the things that I also saw on YouTube that was very helpful was from Hannah Neill. I'll include a link to her video as well in the description. But she had explained that she thought it was helpful to provide a list that she typed up of her personal minimums. And I concur, that was very helpful to refer to because there were questions that he asked me about my limitations and what kind of wind limits I would place on myself and that sort of thing. In total, we spent 2.2 hours on the ground and oral portion of the exam. Check out my next video, the link is below, to hear about the flight portion of my check ride.